Hello, friends. It's the month of February, and you know what that means? It's Valentine's Day, which means love, which means romance. So, I wanted to talk about the best and the worst LGBTQA plus romances that I have read. And so, as you can see, my shelves have been destroyed because these four are where I keep my LGBTQA plus books, and I've torn them apart to find 3 different piles of books to talk with you about. We've got my awful worst books category. We've got my honorable mentions. And then we've got the cream of the crop, the best of the best. These are my favorites. So, in all reality, let's be honest. I love LGBTQA plus romance. I love any queer storyline because I am also in the community and I didn't grow up reading a lot of these romance stories, and so I really love them most of the time. There are some exceptions. So in this stack, let's start off with the worst books. In this stack, we mostly have books that just didn't wow me. They were okay. And to be all honest, there's a couple of books in here that I rated, I think, 3 stars, one that I rated as 2 stars, and one that I did not even finish. So they're kind of 2 bad ones that I didn't really like so much, and then a couple of others that just weren't super great for me. So the first one I want to talk about is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Janette Winterson. Now this may be a controversial pick because this is described on the back, talking about all of the awards this book has gotten, and also that it is considered a classic of contemporary literature. I don't really care though. It was not good. I couldn't even finish it. It was hard to read, and essentially it's supposed to be about this young girl who grows up in a really evangelical household in England and eventually kind of goes through life and comes to terms with her sexuality. And I didn't even get to that part because it was so hard to get through. Even though it's a small book, I remember, and I read this a while ago, but it was just so hard to read. I couldn't even keep my eyes open, and it was just very confusing. I never understood what they were talking about, and I don't know if that's because it's set in London or because it's kind of historical, which I don't even know when it's really set, or if there was just too much Jesus talk for me, which, you know, nothing against religion, but I'm not super religious, and so it just wasn't the book for me. But maybe some of you disagree, so let me know if you actually liked this book. Maybe I'll give it another chance. Then we've got Jack of Hearts. This book I only gave 2 stars, which is very rare for me as a reader. Normally I am very generous and will at least give 3 stars. This book, Jack of Hearts and Other Parts by Elsie Rosen? Not good. Not good. Didn't like it. I should have known, because I think I was at the dollar store and found this at the dollar store, a couple of copies one time, and just randomly picked it up because it was there and it was gay. So essentially this book is about this boy named Jack who has this kind of reputation for having a lot of sex and being sexually promiscuous. And he starts writing an online sex advice column for teens. And he starts getting, I think, anonymous messages from someone who threatens him or tells him that he needs to stop what he's doing. And I think there was even some worries that this person was a stalker and going to physically harm him. But it just wasn't good. The storyline wasn't good. The dialogue between the characters was really bad. So just skip it. Don't read it. That's a little harsh though. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. I did finish it, but it only got 2 stars for me. The next book is Will Grayson by John Green and David Leviathan, both very famous authors. Now, this book Honestly, I gave it a 3, so it wasn't and look at that, my book is upside down. So it wasn't the worst book I've ever read, and not the worst book in this pile, obviously, but it just was not really that memorable. So when I was going through my shelves trying to find the books for this video, this is one that I just felt meh towards. So essentially, what I remember from it is there is 2 guys, both named Will Grayson, and it goes back and forth between their chapters. And I think David Leviathan wrote one of the characters and John Green wrote the other. Don't quote me on it. But essentially, they bump into each other, meet, and essentially fall in love, which I think is really strange and would be really weird to date someone with the same exact name as you. And it just wasn't super memorable. Again, like Jack of Hearts, I think the dialogue was kind of meh, and the storyline was meh, which I know a lot of these are young adult, and so maybe the storylines or the dialogue feels weird to me, but I don't think I'm that far removed from being a young adult. And also, I don't think that necessarily excuses it. Just was very kind of simple, and so didn't do it for me. Okay, so the next book that we have in this worst category is As Far As You'll Take Me by Phil Stamper. Again, a 3-star. I think this was probably, this or the next one are probably the better ones out of this stack. This book was fine. It's essentially about a kid who moves to London and needs to start, it's like musical, so he moves to London and he starts trying to make money by playing his oboe on the streets. I think they call it busking, which taught me a new word. Didn't know what that word was until I read this. But essentially, he's working in London. I think he's staying with his aunt and his cousin, who don't know that his parents don't know that he's there. And he's trying to make money so that he can eventually move to the city and kind of escape the town that he grew up in and be out and proud. And essentially, he meets a boy through the friend group and starts to date him. Conflict ensues, you know, the typical romance things. But I think I put this one in the category because, again, it just wasn't super memorable to me. I do remember some aspects of it, but it just didn't, like, it felt very run-of-the-mill. It felt like any other book and in this kind of genre that I've read, and didn't seem to do anything special for me. The next book that I've got to talk about in this worst category is Skye Falling by Mia McKenzie. Now, this was a book of the month pick for me, and again, this one got 3 stars, and it wasn't, I don't remember it being awful, I just remember it just, as you'll see with the theme, I feel like I keep repeating myself, but it was just kind of meh. So this book is essentially about this lady who, when she was younger, she sold her eggs to make some cash, and later on in her life, she's still living her free wild life, and this kid shows up who says, I am one of your eggs, I'm your child. Well, you're my, like, biological mom. And so they start hanging out, you know, navigating this relationship. But it's awkward and complicated because the main character actually hit on this child's aunt who is caring for her. And so it's all kind of awkward, and, you know, there's hijinks, and it follows both mainly the lady and a little bit of the child, but it's mostly about her kind of discovering herself, figuring out who she is, what kind of relationship she wants with this child, all those kinds of things. But I think the part for me is that, and I don't think the main character, that's not true. I think that the main character for me, I just didn't like her very much. So while it was a fine book and I finished it, I think it says down here in the blurb that the narrator, the main character, is an endearingly prickly narrator. I don't know that I got super endearingly. I think she was just kind of prickly, and it just turned me off from her, and I didn't enjoy reading about some of the decisions that she makes throughout the books. But it was a fine book, just not one of my favorites. Okay, so now we've got some rapid fire honorable mentions for the best category, because I love a lot of these books, but I had to limit myself and pare it down. I had to pick and give you what's the best of the best. But even then I couldn't do that, so you're getting some honorable mentions. This book, The Gravity of Us by Phil Stamper. Phil Stamper was also in the worst category, but this book was so cute, so adorable, amazing. I loved the premise. It's essentially about two boys who their moms are both a part of this like NASA mission, or both of their parents are a part of this NASA mission. I don't know if it's both of the moms, but they essentially, there's a reality show following these moms and this crew as they prepare to get launched into space. And so everyone lives in the same development, and the kids are kind of shown in the reality TV show and all these kinds of things as you would expect. And so they essentially find refuge in each other and develop this relationship and this romantic side, but also they just were very cute and supported each other a lot. And so I really loved that. So that was a great book. Then we've got The Lost Girls by Sonia Hartl, and this was really adorable. Essentially, it is a vampire book that also features the main character. I actually don't remember how she identifies. I think she identifies as bi, but she is in a sapphic relationship or navigating her feelings towards girls. But essentially, this girl is a vampire. She meets up with two other vampire girls who were all turned by this one really awful dude, and essentially they're trying to get revenge on this guy. And so it is hilarious. The plot is all over the place. There's so much random wacky stuff that happens to them, but it's also really endearing and talks a lot about friendship, and also has this like slight romantic side to things, but also mostly about like friendship and girl power and taking down a guy who has wronged you. So I loved that book. Then we've got Wonders of the Invisible World by Christopher Barzak, and this was a Stonewall Honor book, and this one I think most of these that I'm talking about in honorable mentions received 5 stars from me, but they weren't the best of the best. So this one still got 5 stars from me, but essentially what I remember from this is that the main character lives in a small town, and one of his best friends from childhood moves back to town, and as he does that, the main character starts to figure out and have these memories of the past, and I think there's some kind of mystery that they're solving, and they start to develop and recognize their feelings towards each other. And it says that there is a world that's haunted by the stories of the past. And so he starts to unlock and navigate these things as this budding romance also develops. Very good book, very emotional as I remember, but I don't remember too many of the specifics. Then we've got One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This was also Book of the Month pick, and boy was I glad I picked this. So essentially, this is a really cute book where the main character moves to New York City, and there's something magical sci-fi about the subway train where the main girl, when she sees this other girl on the subway train who looks like she is literally out of the 1970s, I believe. Yes. And so essentially, they fall in love, but also it's this story about them trying to figure out how to get her back to her timeline. But of course, there's touching moments of trying to figure out if that's even something they want because they're starting this new romance. And it's just a very cute story with an amazing friend group that I loved reading about and getting to know. Then we've got a read that I finished more recently. I think it was towards the end of last year. So it's The Many Half-Lived Lives of Sam Sylvester by Maya McGregor. First of all, gorgeous book. Just gorgeous and stunning. So essentially the main character is named Sam, and they are non-binary and kind of obsessed with collecting stories of kids who died before they turned 18, I believe. Maybe it's 16. And so this is a thing that they've done for a very long time, and they move into a house and realize that it is actually the kid who lived there before died in the house again before they turned this specific age. And so Sam kind of goes on this quest to figure out the story behind this kid who died in their house, and kind of meets friends and things along the way. But actually, I don't think that this has a super big romance element, so maybe it shouldn't even be included here. But I'm going to talk about it anyway because it's a very cute story. So as you can see, I have a couple of sticky notes in here, which I never really do to books, but when I was reading this, had to go running for the sticky notes to mark up these pages, because there's a couple of quotes that just hit so close to home and that I just thought were so beautiful and encapsulated just like feelings that I've had before. And so I'm going to read them to you. So the first one is, "To me, family is breath. It's trusting the person beside you to demand your right to air in a world that would take it from you." Let that just sink in for you. So essentially, this quote is talking about family doesn't necessarily have to be the people that you are born or that you share blood with, but it's the people who are going to stand there and fight for your right to breathe, even in a world that doesn't want you to, or that pushes a lot of hate towards you. And I just feel like that was such a beautiful line, and something that we all need to hear and reflect on and be there for each other, especially in very trying times when there are lots of attacks on trans and gender diverse people's lives and their rights. So the other quote that I have marked out from this book is, "They don't want to be different, so we never figure out that we're all actually the same." And essentially it's, talking about how people are so scared to be different from each other and show that and tell people that they sit and they keep all of the parts that aren't acceptable for society, or that they worry that other people are going to see as weird. They keep those hidden. And by doing that, they sit and think that they're the only one who feels that. But if they were to share those things with other people, they would realize that we all have those parts, those insecurities of ourselves, those things that we keep hidden. And that's actually a very common thing that could bring people together if they only talked about it. So honestly, very beautiful book. Maybe it should be in the top category, but I don't think it's really much of a romance, so I will keep it out of there for the purposes of this video. The next one that is actually the last honorable mention is Hanian Issue's Guide to Fake Dating by Abida Jaigirdar. I probably butchered that, so I apologize. But this book is so adorable, and I think it also got 5 stars from me. It's essentially a fake dating book. So I think the two main characters, I think one is bi, and I don't know if the other one is bi or if she's a lesbian, but it's a sapphic romance, and it's a fake dating book where, spoiler, like every fake dating book, they start fake dating and it's kind of got this enemies to lovers trope too, and essentially they fall in love after fake dating, and they grow to really support each other. And I don't remember exactly where they are from, but this had really great representation in both of the characters are South Asian, I believe. I don't remember exactly what culture and what family, what their where their families are from and what culture they celebrate, but throughout the book there's lots of just kind of not hitting you over the head. It's just very naturally included, that there are these things from their culture that influence their day-to-day lives. And so I thought that was really cool to see that representation as well. And now we've got my favorite books. These are the best of the best, my favorite LGBTQA plus romance books. So, and actually maybe I should think about, yeah, I think all of these are kind of romance. There's one that maybe doesn't super fit. So, the first is If I Was Your Girl, and this is by Meredith Russo. And this actually I'm including here because my favorite book I'll talk about in a little bit, but this almost replaced that as my favorite book. It was a really special book. I really related to the main character, who is a trans girl. She's new in school and she doesn't want anyone to know that she is trans. And so she is not openly telling people and is very worried and nervous about them finding out and everything like that. And it was just a very beautiful story. I think it navigated the fear that she is experiencing very well. I think it also explored how the kind of process of disclosing these things to people and the intimate nature of that. And I think it was really well done. And I loved this book so much. Since I already talked about it or briefly mentioned it, so if you saw my first ever video on this channel, you'll know that I mentioned this book as one of my all-time favorites. So this is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, and it was a Stonewall Honor book. It also won some other awards. Beautiful cover. But essentially this book I read in high school, and it was when I was struggling with my own identity and coming to terms with my sexuality, and not yet my gender identity, but with my sexuality. And it was very important at the time for me to see the representation, because this book is about twins, and a girl twin and a boy twin, and the boy twin is actually gay and kind of figures out his sexuality and explores that throughout the book. But essentially, beyond that, this book, I could not put it down because the chapters alternate between the twins, and I was so invested in each of their stories that I would just try to rush through the chapter so I could get back to the other twin story. But then once I would get to the next twin story, I would want to rush through that chapter to return back to the other twin story. And so it just had me page turning like no other. And also there's a twist in here that is really good. I did not see coming at all, and it really got me, and I think I was just bawling my eyes out for most of this book. So the pages are probably a little wrinkly from my tears, but it is amazing, and I actually want to reread this again soon because I don't think I've read it for probably like 6 years, and I want to see if it holds up. But one of my favorites, highly would recommend checking it out. The next book, no surprise to anyone, Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. It is a graphic novel, and there's a Netflix show about it. They're coming out with season 2 later this year, I think. But this whole series, just gorgeous. The two main characters, okay, this might be a spoiler, so skip 10 seconds ahead. But actually, you know what? It's not really a spoiler because I won't use any names. But essentially, in this book, there's lots of different representation in this series. And so there is gay representation, bi representation, lesbian representation. I think there's a trans girl, and I think there's some asexual characters. So it really runs the gambit. And the friend group is so beautiful and supportive of each other and really special to me. And it was so fun to read this and watch the TV show. And also a lot of like mental health stuff is talked about in this, specifically, you know, some depression, anxiety, also some eating disorder stuff. So be careful if those are things that are upsetting to you, but these books are beautiful. Again, make me cry. I've watched the TV show a million times. I've read these novels a million times. They're just so good. Then we've got one that maybe doesn't necessarily fit in the romance category, but I think it a little bit does. So This is a little small collection of anthologies, and so it's called Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time, and it's edited by Hope Nicholson. This is so good. I think every single one of these anthologies was beautiful and amazing to me. It is essentially as it says on the cover, an Indigenous LGBT sci-fi anthology. Who's not gonna love that? That's amazing. All the keywords. So I think it was really special because it touched a lot on LGBT identity. It talked a lot about Indigenous identity and also the intersection between those things, all while keeping it in this kind of sci-fi, futuristic, space, alien, technology kind of genre, which I think is really special because, again, representation across the genres. I don't want just romance stories. I don't want just young adult stories. And I don't just want tragic stories. I want stories about feeling love and accepted and the just like queer joy. And while this also talked about like really hard things, I think it also talked a lot about queer joy, and it was just so amazing and so good. I definitely want to check out more work by the people who are included and wrote some of the short stories in here. The next book is Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I recently finished this book, and I don't remember if it's going to be included in if it was already included in my January like reading vlog, or if it's going to be included in my February reading vlog. So I won't go too much into it, but this book, 5-star, all the way, so good. Sapphic relationship. So it was between two main girls, and also set in the like 50s, and so there's also Red Scare stuff going on, and both of the girls, actually I think only one of the girls she's a Chinese American girl, and so there's a lot of talk about identity and immigration and the Red Scare, while also talking about queer life and exploring this, but also like harassment of queer people back in those times when bars were being raided and all these kinds of things. And it was just an absolutely beautiful book. I listened to it on audiobook and could not put it down. It was so good. Please go read it. The last book that I'm going to talk about is called The Darkness Outside Us by Eliot Schrefer. This book was so amazing. It is one of the books that I think I started. I think it was one of the first, if not the first book that I read of 2022. So almost a year ago. And what a way to start off 2022, because this book was so amazing. Again, page turner, could not put it down. But essentially, there's two main characters who get sent off into space to complete some mission, and they have to work on this ship as it gets to its destination, and they fall for each other, but also there is twists and turns, and I don't want to say any more about it because I don't want to spoil it, because girl, this is gonna get you. This is gonna get you so good if you read this book and don't know what's going to happen. And it just, again, made me cry. It made me feel all the emotions. It was a beautiful, beautiful story exploring their relationship and their dynamics and their friendship and just how you grow together as people. And it's about space. Who doesn't love space? So it's so good. Has everything. You need to go read it. Okay, well, thanks for watching this video if you stayed until the end. And sorry I didn't have more scathing reviews of some of these books. I really love queer books, and I cannot get enough of them. So I probably will very rarely tear down a queer book. But I hope this gave you a good range, and maybe you got some new books that you didn't know about before that you can either go hate read or that you can go check out and maybe find a new favorite. So let me know down in the comments if there is any queer books that you especially love, maybe your favorites. If they're romance, if they're other queer books, I want to read them. So put them down in the comments and I'll check them out. But that's all I have for now. Be on the lookout if you want to see later on in the month. I'm going to post my reading vlog for February where, as you could have guessed, I am reading all LGBT books. And so check out my wild ride. Maybe there's some new ones that we find to put in the favorites. Maybe there's some new ones we find that we're gonna put in the worst category. So thanks for listening to and watching my best and worst LGBT romance books. And until next time, stay grounded.